Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome to another new episode of Topline. We got some special guests on the line for this episode. I'm joined by my co-host Asad Zaman, CEO Sales Talent Agency, and AJ Bruno, CEO QuotaPath. AJ, why don't you introduce our two guests? We're incredibly excited to have them.
We're incredibly excited to have the two Clay co-founders. I'm actually going to have them introduce themselves a little bit, but I will say that QuotaPath has been a customer of Clay for the last year, and Brandon Smith on our team is a self-described Clay boy. So I don't know if that's a term you all use, guys. Is that something? Is that the first time you've heard that term?
It's more than a year. I think it's been like 20 months. 20 months of QuotaPath customership.
20 months. Yeah, I know. So we're OG.
Yeah.
We're OG.
Yeah.
Welcome to Topline, the podcast for the best founders, operators, and investors in B2B tech. Every week, AJ Bruno, Asad Zaman, and me, Sam Jacobs, will break down what's important for you to know to be the most well-informed professionals in the market.
This episode of Topline was brought to you by Aircall, the business communications intelligence platform. With Aircall, you can bring your CRM and help desk together with your phone, chat, and messaging system to save time and resources on customer communications, admin, and reporting. To deliver even better customer service, visit Aircall, that's AIRCALL.io.
But I would love to hear from you guys just in your own voice and the quick origin story for all our listeners out there, so they can hear from you guys.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm Kareem, Amin, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Clay. And I'll give you just a quick kind of history of the company and then pass it on to Varun to introduce himself. So we started the company about 7 years ago, and the idea was, how do we give the power of programming to an order of magnitude more people? That was kind of the big intention. And then that evolved into kind of seeing what is the best metaphor that people would be able to latch onto to understand how to do programming. We eventually kind of saw that a spreadsheet is the world's most popular programming environment, but it's not connected to data. So we just connected it to different APIs and quickly saw that as we started to actually see what you could do with that, the top thing that emerged was helping go-to-market teams build lists and do prospecting. We started to do our own prospecting and saw kind of the challenges with having the right data so you could build these lists, so you could message the right customers with the right message, and eventually focus the product on doing just that. And almost that was about, I think, when Varun joined me. And at that time, we kind of coalesced over a mission that I think is very similar to the giving the power of programming, but articulated more in terms of go-to-market teams. And so what we do is we help businesses grow, and we give them a creative tool to do that. And a creative tool is really a tool that has lots of degrees of freedom. So that's kind of like a brief intro to what the product does and how we got here.
That's super interesting. Varun, tell us a little bit about yourself, your role within the business, as well as your take on this, anything you would add to what Kareem said.
Yeah, I can also share the personal story of how we kind of found each other, only because it's very entertaining and funny. So we can kind of go into that too. So basically, and it also started with a cold email, which feels very apropos for our business today. So my name is Varun Anand, and I'm a co-founder and lead our head of ops, and I lead kind of the business side of Clay. And, we kind of found each other because in 2021, I was exploring starting a company, and I was really excited about no-code tools. And I joined, I was in a Slack group about no-code products, and I joined a webinar about Clay. and but I was the only one who showed up. No one else showed up. And someone at Clay, Nash, was doing the webinar, was actually pretty upset about the fact that no one else showed up, and thought it was a huge waste of her time. But I was stoked. I was like, "What did I just see?" Like, I started using the product, and I was like, "This is so cool." I was like, "How does this company have no customers?" I was like, "What is happening here?" Because this is really cool, and I was really excited about it. And I was actually getting married in a couple of weeks, but this is all I could talk to my wife about. I was like, this is it. I can see it. I was really excited about this. So I cold emailed Kareem and Nikolai, and Kareem, classically was at a silent meditation retreat, so didn't respond. But Nikolai,
is that true? Is that true?
It is true.
That's amazing. I want to hear about that after this.
But Nikolai did, and we hit it off, and then we started spending more time together, and very quickly I realized that this was like an infinitely better idea than any idea I had, and I was like, we should just commit and do this, and that's kind of when I joined, and we kind of like focused and committed and kind of started growing from there.
What's been the growth story? I feel like, just in the last year or two, I've heard so much more about Clay. It's always fascinating, right? These overnight success stories where you've been doing this for 7 years and all of a sudden you emerge into the public consciousness in a way that's like really meaningful and impactful. But of course, you've been working on it for so long in the background. What were the catalysts for, the recent momentum?
Yeah, I think again, I can tell like an anecdote that I think is funny around this, which is that kind of helped give us one insight around who to focus on. That I think was one of the original catalysts of the growth. So one thing I did, in early 2022 is I want to try to talk to a lot of people. So I was part of this sales listserv that Pete Kazanji runs, Modern Sales
MSP.
Pros. Yeah, MSP. And I'd been a member for years. And I just searched in the history of MSP for words like data enrichment and outbound. And I basically found 30 people who I thought said something intelligent about this topic in the last 4 years. And I just emailed all of them. And I was like, hey, here's what you said. This is pretty smart. Would love to talk to you. We're building this thing in the space. And almost all of them agreed to chat. And they kind of ran the gamut, as the people who are on that listserv. Heads of marketing, heads of sales, SDRs, AEs, whatever. But the only people who really had any idea what we were talking about when we got on the phone were agency owners, lead gen agency owners. And the reason was because they were, they're entrepreneurial, they're technical, but most importantly, they feel the pain most acutely because they have lots of clients doing the same thing. And that kind of gave us the first, let's start with these people and let's help them. And it actually kind of how we stumbled upon our first go-to-market motion, which is we would help them, and then we would encourage them to make content about us on LinkedIn. And they would do this not out of the goodness of their heart, though they're very nice people, but because it's in their incentives, right? Because they're trying to build a brand. They're trying to build a business. How do they do that? They post on LinkedIn, build social credibility and capital, and position themselves as telling these people about this new tool and you should trust me with helping you with this tool. And so that's kind of how we stumbled on that. That kind of gave us a catalyst there, and we kind of focused and doubled down on that as a distribution channel and a go-to-market motion. And so that was a really great catalyst and a focus. And then, obviously the advent of LLMs also really helped as well, because not only were we able to use it internally to dramatically improve a lot of the individual features, but also it helped us complete the overall workflow and help us do email personalization at scale. So those are a couple of things in the early days that really helped drive some of the growth.
That's super interesting. Kareem.
There was also, last thing that I thought was interesting is the community. Because one thing that I think was really interesting with our community effort is I think lots of companies have Slack groups and stuff, but we actually removed our intercom from our website and our product. And we said, if you want support, you have to join the Slack community.
Oh.
And everyone just joined, and because our product needed that much support, and we use that as a really engaging way to engage with our customers. And now this is a 15,000 person community.
Oh, wow. Varun, a tactical question on what you just said. How many agency owners did you have to build these types of relationships with for it to become something that started making a wave in the market? Right now you guys have so many, but what was how many did it take to start noticing oh, we're part of the zeitgeist now, it's working?
Yeah I don't remember the precise number, but what I will say is that there are these like dark social WhatsApp groups. So there's some, they have the funniest names. So one is called the SAS Yacht Club, as an example. And basically, like, I would join all these like WhatsApp groups. And actually, one of our earliest employees who we hired was an agency owner himself and was a power user himself. His name is Eric Noslowski. And he helped us with this agency motion because he has a ton of credibility in the space and is a community builder in the space. And so together we like worked on this, and we were in these WhatsApp groups. People would talk about problems that Clay could solve every day in these WhatsApp groups. So we would like message them, help them, enable them. And then Eric and I would work together to kind of drive the momentum. And then very soon these WhatsApp groups became a lot about Clay as well. And so that's kind of like what was one of like the signals there.
That's super interesting. Kareem, you guys just announced your Series B round, 46 million at a $500 million valuation. Congratulations. Obviously, when you raise at that valuation, what the investors are signaling to the market is that we feel that this company has a pretty solid shot at being, let's say, a $5 billion company and a real legitimate shot at being 10 billion plus. And the success you've had to this point is proof that you can execute against this vision credibly. But really what they're investing in is this greater vision that you have for the future. So tell us a bit about that. Like, what are you guys envisioning for the next couple of years? What is Clay going to become? What role is it going to play in go-to-market in it once it achieves its full composition?
Yeah, totally. I think the way to think about it is the mission is creative tools to grow your business, right? And one way to think about what that means is Figma or Photoshop is to designers, what we are to growth marketers and rev ops, right? So the final vision is any idea that you can have for how to grow your company should be translatable into action through Clay almost instantly. And then you can see if it works or not, right? And by any idea, I mean, if you're trying to find new customers, you should be able to do that through Clay. If you want to convert customers that are coming to you, you should be able to do that through Clay. If you want to expand customers that you have, these are all ways of growing your business. And we don't really see a difference. To us, it's a continuum between sales and marketing, right? I think as we kind of build more AI tools, we're going to find that actually, I think the jobs to be done are going to change. In particular, you are going to need more and more kind of creative ways to figure out how to reach customers through a particular channel or at a particular time. And it can't be the same technique over and over again. And you have to kind of think about it holistically, not just how do we get new customers, and then there's some customers that are coming to us. It's all the same experience for customers, right? And you need to have a full bird's eye view of the plan that you're executing. And the real goal is how do you get, repeatable revenue and be sure that what you're doing works from the growth side. Clay will be able to do all of that.
As you are talking, I'm envisioning a marketplace component almost, right? Like I can come, I need data, I can just like connect with vendors through Clay.
Right.
What that makes me wonder is, as we look into the future, over time, things that are cutting edge one day become commoditized over time. Call recording is an example. Cutting edge 5 years ago, pretty commoditized now. Is data now commoditized essentially, A? And B, what else are you noticing that is part of the go-to-market stack is becoming commoditized and is going to be available through a marketplace type of model that companies that provide it lean into versus things that people think are valuable enough that they can build their own motion into the market and they want to run that way?
Right. I mean, I think, there's a couple of ways to answer this question, right? I think thinking about what's commoditized and what isn't is kind of, I'll leave that more to VCs and
people pontificators.
And people who are analyzing the market. We're focused on what is actually helpful to customers. And we internally don't think about how do we build a defensible moat or what is actually going to be something that we own, because then we're thinking from our perspective. We are thinking from the customer's perspective, and then aligning that back to what helps us. So we only do things that will help customers, right? And then align that back into why does it belong in Clay. So I'll just shift the question a little bit to kind of give you maybe a perspective on how I see the market evolving in the next little bit and like where we sit in it. I think there's kind of three paths. So there's some legacy players and like databases of data, right? And all-in-one tools that cater to SDRs, right? So you're selling to the seller directly and you're saying, hey, here's an all-in-one tool that allows you to find customers and message them, right? And maybe there's kind of variations of that for other individual contributors that are frontline with customers. Then there's another set of things that are saying, well, you don't actually need that anymore. We're just going to use AI to automate all of that. So you have like AI SDR tools or AI marketing tools. They're just saying it's a one-stop solution. You press a button, it'll solve your kind of like outbound problem. And then the third bucket is where we belong, where we're saying actually, we're taking a different approach where instead of empowering SDRs or AEs directly to sellers, we're saying actually all of that should be centralized with someone who is more technical, maybe an ops person, a go-to-market ops person, or a growth marketing person who has the big picture around what is the idea that you want to implement, right? Like what's an outbound campaign you want to implement? What's the campaign? How do you take all your inbound leads, score them? And what are you going to say to them? And you channel kind of the ideas through them. They implement it in a centralized way. They have access to this marketplace of data providers and other tools for cleaning the information and also creating messages. And then you see how that campaign did, and then you can update it. The sellers are then free to spend all of their time engaging directly with customers on a human-to-human basis. And so that's kind of how we're seeing the future evolve, and that's where we see the most value. And so again, it comes back to this creative part, right, where we are going to give you all the tools to implement any idea, right? We might even suggest some of the ideas, but the alpha is always going to come from you knowing your business and your customers and how the market's evolving, and using Clay to test out these ideas, seeing what works and what doesn't, and adjusting that. We don't kind of try to automate all of that away, because if you do, everybody else will do the same thing and you'll just go back to zero. And I think actually all three categories will coexist in the future. It's just a question of what's the biggest one. Right?
That's super interesting. That's really nicely laid out. I appreciate that, Kareem. So, Varun, let's click into the AI component of this a little bit. One of the things we talk about a lot on this pod is how over the coming years, what seems to become easier over time is building things, and what seems to get harder and harder is distribution. Part of the reason distribution is getting harder is just it's a noisier world. The supply of tech companies increases at about 31% a year. So there's just categories are a lot more competitive. Everybody is going after everybody is biting at each other's ankles. And so breaking through becomes harder. And then over the last 12, 18 months, we've had Gen AI pop into the mix. And it's making everybody wonder, in the future, what's the ideal balance of human and AI in outreach, right? Like, is it just going to be a lot of automated outreach that lifts the floor of a sales team, but not the ceiling, right? Like, it doesn't make your best salesperson better. They can do their things individually a lot nicer, but it makes your worst one better. Or is it more of a co-pilot-y type of solution that enables everybody to be more productive, but in a stylish way where we're not just spraying and praying aggressively? Really curious to get your view on this. What's the intersection of go-to-market and AI look like in your mind over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, so I think if you zoom out a little bit, I think when outreach came into the picture, outbound really kind of like came into its own, and people and a lot of tech companies started using this as a real go-to-market channel that really scaled. And then obviously there was kind of like the predictable revenue model and things like that. And I think we're getting to a point, like you're saying, where that's like really saturated. And I think we're seeing that not only in the signals, I think we're seeing that in all of our inboxes. And I think we're seeing that in even the deliverability rules that Google has come out with and stuff like that. There's just a lot of kind of spam in the world, right? And so I think we are philosophically aligned with reducing that, actually, because we want people to find each other. And I think maybe we can all say that for a good amount of things that are in each of our inboxes, people are not finding us in the right way. And I think we really believe in this like very targeted approach, and finding the right ICP and like giving people the tools to do that. And so we kind of see a world where people are finding each other much more efficiently, and AI is kind of a way of doing that, right? And I think it's less of the co-pilot approach where people are it's using as an aid to help every single person be a bit more efficient, and more as something that's leveling up like the entire team in like a centralized, scalable way.
Right, and I would just add to that like just kind of like more opinionated pieces is we're making the best people better. That's our position. We don't think it makes sense to make the least productive person a little bit better. And in sales, I don't know, the Federer kind of like talk that went viral.
Yeah.
Where like, he won 56% or 53% of the points, right?
Yep.
And so you want just that in this kind of thing where it's when it's a bit, the market is getting more saturated and there's more competition, you want an edge, and that edge disappears very quickly, but it's there temporarily. And it's kind of like the stock market in some ways, right? Mm-hmm. You want that edge, that extra piece of information that helps you find the right buyer at the right time, right? And then it goes away. And that's the difference between kind of you winning the deal and not. And that's constantly changing. The reason it's changing is your product is changing, the market is changing, right? The buyers are changing. And so you're constantly doing this. And the people who are not kind of like competing at the top, it's actually not helpful to help them by 50%, right? Because the person who's the best is just going to win. So it has some of the dynamics of a winner takes all market. And right. And so our position is we give the tools to allow the best people to execute kind of the most creative ideas. And then, we can't help you sell your product if the product isn't the right product. But we can help you learn that maybe this is the wrong market, or maybe this is the wrong way to talk about it, or maybe this is the wrong product. And that's the point of the go-to-market motion. It's feedback into the product. So you can think about the go-to-market motion as just a way to sell your product or to find the right customer. But really, it's just a feedback loop back into the product development lifecycle to understand, are we building the right thing? Are we reaching the wrong customers? Because if you find out you're reaching the wrong customers, you might be building the wrong thing.
Kareem, we had a conversation, a debate on this pod a couple weeks ago, maybe it was even last week, and the debate was around how aware CEOs and founders should be about the competitive set and competitive dynamics. And AJ's perspective, which is one that I'm probably more closely aligned with, there's sort of two perspectives, and there's a debate around whether the perspectives are informed by the availability of capital in the market and the growth of the overall ecosystem. But one perspective is, don't worry about your competitors. Worry about your customers. Put your head down, execute your roadmap, and just make sure that you're doing everything you can to deliver the best possible value to your customers. That will be your North Star. There's another perspective, maybe Asid's perspective, which is it's negligent not to be aware of what's happening with your competitors, that you have to be aware. It doesn't mean that you're constantly distracted, but there should be some feedback loop for your company that is ingesting and incorporating competitive intelligence, effectively market intelligence. That might impact your pricing, that might impact your packaging, that might impact your product development, but you can't just be blithely unaware. And, there have been a number of tools similar to Clay that have popped up. And then there's this other thing where like a lot of these roadmaps just as the same, to the point of the outreach example that Varun pointed out, it just feels like sometimes the roadmaps for certain categories seem to converge, so that all of a sudden every data enrichment business has a call recording capability, a transcription capability. So how do you think about so first of all, like broadly speaking, do you attach to either one of those camps? Either who cares about your competitors? I'm just going to do my thing. My customers will tell me what I need to do, or I need to be aware of competitors to a certain extent. And how do you think about that specifically for Clay as, other tools, other no-code tools, other LLM enhanced workflow tools emerge? How do you think about that, particularly given, all the money that was just injected?
There's only one right answer here, by the way. Only one right answer.
Well, you'll be happy to know that I'm.
You're going to split the difference.
Yeah. So, just based on my attendance of this silent retreat, you can know that I'm of the middle way. And I think clear. I think it is a mistake in general to be attached to kind of like a clear kind of like answer to any of these, because it ends up being a disservice to people running the business if they don't know how to connect that to like their approach and their way of building a company. So basically I'm trying to say I don't think that I think you could do it either way. I think you can ignore the competitors and build for your customers if you know who your customer is. And in general, I would agree with that early on, because it doesn't really matter. As you get bigger and you start to encounter the competitors, you start to need to understand how you position against them and who's winning in what deals, right? But you could also think about the competitive landscape, try to find the niche and be like, okay, that's us, right? That's just another approach to it. So I think both of them work. I think the approach that we've been taking is ignore the competition, mainly because you have to kind of tie it back to your mission, right? So the mission is what guides you, right? So that's why we're creative tools to grow your business. And what are the implications of that statement, right? So should we build a video recording thing? Maybe. But does that help you build a more creative kind of solution to grow your business? There are kind of like ways to make that happen, but it's not immediately obvious. But it does belong in growing your business, right? And so it's lower down our priority list. That's one way to think about how to prioritize which areas you do and don't do. But of course, if you want to grow your company, you have to enter other segments. And the way we think about it is which segments belong inside of Clay to help our customers even more achieve what they're trying to do, rather than saying like, hey, how do we abstractly grow our business? Oh, we should own this other area, right? It's just what makes sense for our set of customers. What's the adjacent piece that makes sense? And should we partner or should we build it ourselves? Those are all difficult judgments, and there's no quick way to answer it. And maybe actually just to go back to the first question that you asked Varun around how we got started. We actually knew about agencies as well at the time, and we weren't focused on them. Right. So we saw them using the product and they were excited about it. And we were like, should we focus on agencies? Is that a big enough market? Or should we focus on startups? So the decision making here, there's no secret to it. And I think when people hear kind of like some of these strategies, they'll be like, oh, of course, they went into the WhatsApp groups, told them about the product, and then it picked up. Yeah. That's not actually how it works. And there was no magic like bullet. It is a feedback loop where we were actually building something that sophisticated agency users understood because they had that problem, because they were trying to do outbound at scale. They gave us feedback. We implemented the feedback and we went back to them and created momentum. That momentum led to them talking about it because it was useful to them and because they wanted more business. And then other startups started hearing about it and they started moving into jobs at startups and then brought us in. And so actually when people talk about momentum, that's the only thing that matters. You need to figure out a small use case where you are better than everybody else, and then incorporate the feedback as quickly as possible, and then have a clear plan of what is the exact next step that you should take that will increase the value to your customers and lead you eventually to whatever your mission statement is. And that's why I'm saying that I think the products will coexist. There will be a creative tool to grow your business where you can implement your ideas en masse. And there will also be tools that help individual sellers. There might be fewer sellers, which means it might be a smaller business. And so you, like, if you're building a VC backed company, you have to have some kind of sense of why you think the market that you're in is evolving to be the biggest one.
That's fascinating.
Can I ask one specific question? Only because there are lots of people that know who clay.com is, but then there's lots of people who don't, and some of them might be listening to this podcast. So when you talked about those core specific use cases, we all understood outreach is going to help me send this one. It's a mail merge to thousands of people that will prompt a next action that might be connect on LinkedIn. What are the core use cases that people should be thinking about when they want to use clay.com? Varun, why don't you answer this one?
Sure. I mean, there's basically two, right? Piece number one is data enrichment. You need every B2B company needs data about who they're selling to or who's coming inbound to them. And we help you fix that by aggregating all the data providers in the world that exist. We put them into one credit-based marketplace. And this is great because you only have to manage one relationship. You get wholesale rates. And most importantly, your data quality dramatically improves because you get to combine all the different data providers that exist into one. So you can waterfall them and try one after the next. So you can improve your data quality. That's one. Two, you have data. What do you do with the data? You message people. And so you use Clay to automate your messaging with the data for your outbound messaging, for your inbound messaging, or to your existing customers. So just those two things.
Cool. That's cool. So you guys have relationships, wholesale, effectively reseller relationships with everybody from like ZoomInfo to Apollo to maybe dozens of other data providers. Is that accurate?
That's right, yeah. With ZoomInfo, yeah, so with those, less so, but there's more like dozens of data providers that exist in the world, ranging from like BuiltWith to Clearbit to Predict Leads to other small ones. And a lot of those providers have niche data points to broader data sets, and you can just access any of those through Clay by paying with Clay credits, and then you can combine them together in different ways to maximize your data coverage.
Right. Or you could use your own API keys. So. Right. If you have direct relationships with some of these data providers, you're welcome to use them inside of Clay. Our goal is to make the end-to-end experience possible in one place.
One quick question. What's the balance between personalization and automation in these messages? Like, I've seen what Clay can do, and it is far superior than what type of automation we've seen so far in the world. It feels closer to real, like it feels human, but it's still automated, right? Like, what's the balance in the future? Like, do you think we'll be in a world where in the coming year or two, a fully automated message set up the right way technically on the back end can be at par with what the best writer of a personalized message right now can do? Like, is that the world we're getting to?
Yeah, don't forget that actually that people kind of get really focused on the message writing piece, but it's actually who you're targeting and what you're saying that's the data piece. That's actually much, much more important. So just think about it this way, right? Like, I have a car lease and I started getting messages recently by mail saying, hey, your car lease is ending, right? Do you want to switch? We could buy it. And they were kind of interesting to me, right? But if you sent it to me a year ago, I wouldn't care.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what you actually say. It's just I'm not thinking about changing my car, right? And so I think the timing / who you're actually targeting is what the data is mainly for. And then afterwards, what you say in it and how that's formatted it's like sufficient. It's like necessary, but not sufficient, right? And so I think, yes, LLMs are very close to being able to do that. And what we do is we encourage people to only add the personalization in elements of the message, right? Part of it is templated, and part of it is personalized. So, I was reading someone who did like an interesting outbound campaign where they needed to reach out to the restaurants who had a lot of orders in order to kind of like sell them software that would help them manage that. And how do you find that out? Right? It is not obvious. There is no data that says this restaurant has a lot of orders. Right? And so this is where the creative part comes in. And what they started looking at is, why don't we track the number of reviews or messages that are being left on this customer's Yelp, on these restaurants' Yelp pages? And that is a proxy to how popular / how many orders this restaurant might be getting, and the traffic to that web page. And let's use that. And then they go and say, hey, it looks like you're getting all these reviews and all this stuff. It sounds like you have a lot of customers. Maybe you need this. And that worked, right? So that's what you actually need to do to sell things, is find proxies to who is a good customer and then message them.
That makes sense. Before you guys go, what was this? How long were you on the silent retreat for? What did you learn? Why did you do it?
Right.
I want 5 minutes on that.
Yeah, you want the details.
This is the question, all right? Like,
was it transformational for you? Is it? How often have you done it? And I guess here's a connected question. The connected question, which is related to business, is we talk a lot about the journey, the founder journey, the CEO journey on this show. And the reason is because it takes a really, really long time to build something of enduring value. And the biggest risk, from my perspective, the number one cause of death is, of course, running out of money. And, the cause of death in humans is by definition your heart stopping and not beating anymore. But the things that lead to that moment oftentimes can be exhaustion from the founding team or from the founder and CEO. So there's a connected question of like, how do you manage? You've been doing this for 7 years. You just raised a ton of money to pursue what is probably a 5 to 10 year vision ahead of you. And I'm wondering how the silent retreat fits into that. But I also want to know the juicy details of what it was like.
Details, yeah. Well, I don't want to. I think it's. I don't want to glorify it in a way that is inappropriate. I think it was part of like my personal journey. I don't think it's like a solution to anything. And for me, it's not something that I was seeking. It just kind of like emerged into my consciousness through like a couple of people that I trust. And it was a space to kind of reflect on my approach. And the approach was not necessarily related to the company itself, but more, what is it that I'm trying to do? Like, what is it that I care about? And kind of like re-reflecting on kind of like what my goals are personally, and how they're aligned kind of like with the work that I'm doing day to day. That was the intention. I don't think that's kind of what ended up happening. I didn't really think much about that. It was very much like a spiritual experience, right? You go and you don't speak for 10 days and you're meditating 12 hours a day. You don't tend to think about material things. It was very ethereal. But the thing that I think what you're getting at is, I do think that it is a like profoundly like personal journey, and you need to kind of know. You can definitely be like, hey, I'm opportunistically starting a company to make a lot of money, and that's great. And you can, at least as long as you're aligned with your reasons, you can then align everything else with that. Or you could be like, hey, this is a mission. I've been affected by this issue, and I'm building it for this reason. And that's another kind of like fair reason. But it's important to know why you're doing it, because then you can see how your own, I think I've talked about this before, but it's basically when you're in a company and it's small, all of your traits are amplified in it, right? So if you are someone who changes their mind a lot or gets worried or anxious, you'll find yourself changing your mind a lot, or you're being anxious about decision making, right? And so if you can see yourself clearly, you can start to debug these things that are getting in your way. And if you can debug those things, you can be ready when the opportunity is available. right? So if you're, in our case, for example, just to make it concrete, right? It's we had a very big vision with a very abstract kind of desire, and we knew a lot of the kind of like possibilities of how to implement that, but it took us some time to narrow down our vision and know that that's okay, we'll get there even though we've narrowed it down for now, right? And I think that seems pretty simple, but then to do that in the thousands of little decisions that you have to do every day, that's very challenging, and to stay focused on that. And so the silent retreat was a way of, for me, being able to reflect on how my mind is making decisions and catch them as they're happening, right? Like I'm just able to see it more clearly and be like, hey, that's not aligned with what I said I'm trying to do, right? I'm going to make a different decision. Just take away the automated, you have habits and they're running on autopilot. And now I'm able to see, oh, that's an autopilot decision. That's not the intention that I wanted to make. And this shows up in lots of things, like who you pick in the company, what your, like the whole like worrying about competitors or not. You might say that you don't worry about competitors, but then spend all of your time thinking about them because that's how you normally behave. So it's just kind of like a way to match your actions with your words by being able to see clearly how your mind is operating.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you very much.
Took notes. That was great.
Guys, thanks so much for joining us. We're really excited for your progress. I think you're working on something really interesting and cool. And obviously, we've seen lots of people talking about it. So thanks for being our guests on the Topline podcast. Congrats on the fundraise, but more importantly, congrats on 7 years of success and building something that's going to be of enduring value to lots and lots of people that want to grow their businesses.
Appreciate that. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us, guys.
That's brilliant, guys. Thank you.
Guys.
Thank you.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Are you ready to revolutionize the way your team goes to market? Join us from October 14th to 16th in Austin, Texas for GTM 2024, the premier B2B SaaS conference where the world's top go-to-market executives learn, plan, and execute strategies that fuel growth. Expect 3 days packed with interactive sessions and panels addressing top-of-mind challenges, hands-on planning and forecasting workshops for 2025, and of course, plenty of networking opportunities. Whether you come alone or bring your entire leadership team, you'll find valuable insights and dedicated time to prepare for the year ahead. And be sure to stick around Austin for GTM 2024 awards, celebrating the top leaders in our industry. Ready to get aligned and get ahead? Visit joinpavilion.com/GTM 2024 and use the code TOPLINE for 15% off your ticket. Details are in the show notes. Hope to see you in Austin.
We're back.
Are you there, AJ?
I was on a silent retreat during that entire episode.
And what did you realize?
I need to get the mobile Starlink and make sure that my internet is like rock solid going forward. I heard everything on the episode. It was solid. Here's what I'll say. The product is really what Kareem said at the end in terms of personas is exactly, and timing is exactly how we use it. So it basically waterfalls in. It looks at a column. It's an active spreadsheet. It looks at a column and says, this is a data point. And then it looks at the next column. This is a data point, and this is a data point. Has this person moved jobs? Have they changed LinkedIn? And then like it just automates this really interesting workflow. It's really technical. The product itself is very, very technical. And that's something I think that they're working on. Simplifying.
So what you just said, what does that mean? I still, even when they explained it, I didn't quite understand. Like, is it like because it has all these data sources, it's like it knows when somebody changes a job, or maybe a new like head of revenue operations is hired at a company, and because that's a good opportunity to sell commission planning software, that triggers an alert, which then triggers an email from one of your SDRs or something like that?
Yeah, so basically each column, one column might be from LinkedIn and you're looking at a persona. The next column would be Apollo data. The next column would be smart leads.
Yep,
and
that makes sense.
It's going to grab those data points and pull them in. And I'm sure you heard everything I just said.
No, I did. We did hear it, and it's going to pull in those data points.
Yeah. It's all
Where
about
are we without the data points? If the data points aren't pulled in, we're nowhere.
What are you
We're
doing?
back
Oh
to
my
square one.
goodness.
You're pushing, you're not pulling.
Here I am in San Francisco, the mecca of Silicon Valley. Internet should be beaming down on top of me, and yet here I am.
I don't know what it is with you and the internet. It's never, might not be ever.
Have you ever seen the cartoon where like there's a person with a cloud on top of them wherever they go, the cloud is raining? Like I think that's like
It's
AJ's
just
internet.
AJ's bad internet. It just follows him wherever. What do you think, Asid? We'll go to somebody with good internet.
Man, I like Kareem's energy a lot. Like
I loved it.
He was so calm.
That guy's wiser than me. That's what I feel.
I took notes, man. Like I actually took notes. I was like, oh, like it's so well.
What did you write down?
This idea of debugging yourself, I think, is fascinating because we sometimes don't, I have tons of issues. One of them is this obsessive compulsive disorder that leads to these certain tendencies. And I think the way to think about it is that these are just bugs that have to be debugged and not like think of it a lot more than that. Like sometimes that way of thinking about it almost simplifies it as like this thing that we all are humans. We're going to have features and bugs, and we need to amplify our features, which are the areas where we spike in our superpowers and whatever you want to call it. And then these areas that are going to be bugs, and you have to be thoughtful about what are the bugs and how do I debug it. And most of them are debuggable, which is the interesting thing, right? Like you can break a lot of these tendencies. You just have to recognize them and then do the work. And I thought, just the framing of it was fascinating. This idea that autopilot decisions based on the bugs that you have and taking care of those so that when opportunity arises, you're equipped to capitalize on it. I think this goes to what you were writing about over the weekend, Sam, around luck. Luck presents itself and then you have to capitalize on it. And capitalizing on it is not just recognizing the moment, but being prepared to do the thing that needs to be done. And I just thought he articulated it really, really well.
It's rare to find such a chill founder who's raised so much money. He seems very laid back, which I really appreciate because how many CEOs do we know that aren't neurotic or maniacs as human beings? So
I find it's I say this a lot. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. What I find is that the habits in my brain are so deeply ingrained that, we can talk about them all we want, but it really takes almost daily effort. And it is work. It is the work. And I was on a call before this podcast and, I espouse all these ideas about being calm and being zen and trying to be optimistic and kind and open-hearted. And, sometimes certain people, they just push your buttons in such a way that you find yourself on tilt. And things were coming out of my mouth that I don't like.
Yeah.
And it's a weird feeling to actually watch the autopilot take control in a way that's actually harmful and damaging and feel like, and then have a part of you that's like, yeah, you shouldn't be saying that. Like, don't say that. Don't say that. Just hang up the phone.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating experience, which, maybe I need a silent retreat because then there's other times when I'm just so, my therapist calls it your big self. That's what they call it in, IFS, internal family systems. There's this idea of like, which is, it's almost like God or something. It's like the ideal, it's the good-hearted version of you without all of the weird stuff that's been layered on top that drives all of these compulsions and neuroses. And, sometimes I embody that. And then sometimes like, I feel like something else is in control. And I don't like that.
I feel like
nothing worse than when you hang up the phone and you're like, that was not the best version of me.
I love what you're saying because it just goes to how constant the work has to be, right? So when I started going through this OCD thing, I went and I saw a therapist because it got really bad. It became a bit debilitating, and it is quite a debilitating thing when it's at its peak. And so I was looking for different solutions. I sat down with a therapist, and the therapist like, good news, bad news. Good news, bad news, it's really bad. Like this can be debilitating. It can impact your life. It can slow it down, etc., etc. Good news, out of all the mental health disorders, it's the most solvable. It's one of the worst, but it's the most solvable. I was like, oh, why? And they're like, well, what happens is that in your brain, you get these pathways that get created that are your tendencies. So something happens in your external environment and it triggers this, I need to wash my hand 37 times in a certain way. And if I break the pattern, then I need to do it again. Now I'm stuck there for half an hour washing my hands, right? So they're like, there's a pattern, but it's breakable. And so how you break it is you go through this exercise called exposure therapy. And exposure therapy, it starts by creating a list of all your tendencies and problems. And you rank them according to this thing called SUD. SUD is subjective unit of distress. And that's the point that I found most interesting, which is distress is subjective. What distresses you 9 out of 10 might distress me 2 out of 10. What distresses me 9 out of 10 might do the same at a 2 level for you. And so you just rank it by levels of distress. And you start by exposing yourself to the thing that's a 1 or 2 out of 10 and sitting with the stress. And so it's like, okay, 10 out of 10 is this thing that I'm not going to tackle this. But there's a little thing that I clean the doorknob every time I touch it. Okay, that's a small one. It doesn't screw me up too much. So I'm going to not do it. I'm going to sit with it. And if you do that a couple of times, you realize the world isn't falling apart and it starts breaking that neural pathway. Once you break one, you break the second, you break the third. Now you've got like this avalanche that you've created in a positive way. And it's just really interesting. It's interesting to like, you know, people like to tell us that we're perfect the way we are and we're not. Like, we're not born perfect. We have strengths, we have weaknesses. And if you want to live a good life, you have to be humble about the fact that you're not born perfect, that you have to look inside and see what are my unique bugs. And a lot of them are solvable. They just require work.
Sam, did you hang up the phone earlier in the earlier conversation?
I mean, it ended.
It ended.
The conversation did end. I don't know, at some point the connection was severed and we were not speaking anymore.
Will you go back and revisit? Do you ever like retro and say like, hey, that wasn't the best version of myself. Like, let's revisit this?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I think it's just life. You know, everything Asad's saying is true, and everything guy Kareem is saying is true, which is like you want to debug yourself, so to speak. But like that assumes a lot of things, right? And that assumes that there's like an objective reality, right? There's an objective reality where there's like a clear idea of the good you versus the bad you, and like all of life is judgment, right? Because some part of all of this is like, well, part of it is like, the reason I'm reacting a certain way is because is honestly in this particular instance, it's you're presented with a different, like a version of the world that is it's like a complete inversion of your experience. And my brain just reacts so primally to that idea that somebody is like, listen, obviously the sky is green. And you're like, I can't even deal with this because the sky is clearly blue. And so some part of it is like, well, you shouldn't care what anybody says anyway. Right? Like Buddha says that enlightenment is the end of suffering. Like, just let it go. It doesn't matter. It's all fake anyway. And then the other part was like, yeah, but I want to put good into the world and I want to help other people. So to a certain extent, I do care what other people think about me and what sort of regard they hold me in. Anyway, and then there's also, for example, in this case, like there's certain people you just cannot control what they think of you. They are going to think that the sky is green. They're just going to think that. And I want desperately to convince them that the sky is blue, and I'm not going to be able to. I'm just not going to be able to. And that is a thing where you just have to let go. Like there's no, hey, I'm really sorry about that. Nothing matters. Certain people, certain instances, certain situations, you have to let go that it's going to respond in any way that would give you any control. You have no control. And every effort that you make to exert control will backfire times 10. And the only thing you can do is surrender. The only thing you can do is say, you know what? I just can't, we just can't have those kinds of interactions anymore. And that is, for a founder, for a CEO, for somebody that's used to bossing people around or, or just like exerting influence and control over your life, to be presented with something which is the same for death or any kind of like tragedy where like there's nothing to be done. There's nothing to be negotiated with. In some ways, a death is almost easier in a way, because at least it's very, very clear.
Absolute.
Right. The hardest thing is a situation where there's the appearance of flexibility and rationality, and you just have to learn that it does not exist, and you have to let go. And it messes with your mind. I was not even the first part of this podcast, I was like trying to get into it. I like Kareem and Varun though.
They're great. It's so interesting what you just said. I had that week last week, now that I reflect on it with that lens, where there's a situation related to like addiction for somebody that I'm close to, and that thing I have no control over. Like, it is going to screw me up one way or the other. And you feel like, all these things that we just spoke about, there are those moments where you're just the passenger and it's going to affect you. And everything you try, you can't do much about it. It's fascinating. Humbling.
Yeah, the fascinating part is like there's a layer of perceived rationality, right? There's a layer. So there's this illusion. If I just say the right thing, if I do the right thing and say the right thing, this will resolve itself to my benefit. And the reality is like, no.
Yeah, I know.
We can all agree that gravity is a force that exists and Earth is 1G, and this is the way the wind blows. And I'm like, no, I don't agree with that at all. And now you're trying to manipulate me. You're like, I'm not trying to manipulate you at all.
I think finding the balance of, at least mentally for myself, knowing that there are a bucket of things that I can't be in control against, like this particular situation that happened last week. But that doesn't mean there aren't a multitude of things that I can control, that I can debug, that I can use good habits and, intentionality to like address. And it's balancing that out. I have to remind myself that it is balanceable. Like, just because there's this doesn't mean there isn't this.
Yeah. All three of us have talked extensively about the things going on in our lives that we can or can't control. We've done it on this podcast. We've done it to each other. And it is so interesting how on a week-to-week basis, we're like, coming in this week, we know these things are going to happen, and we just have to like go with the flow and control the things that we can control. So we figured out life on this podcast, by the way. We're just crushing it.
I don't know that we did. We figured out that we can't figure it.
I have a quick question about what they spoke about. I found them amazing, very fun to hang out with. There's one thing that they said at the end that I wonder, like I've just been thinking about since they said it, which is around this personalization is not as important as reaching out to the right person and just saying the thing. And I get it. Like I get that a big part of the win is just saying the right thing saying something to the right person. It doesn't have to be said in the most eloquent way. But then that just like, what about copywriting? Like, when you think about some of the greatest ads that have driven some of the highest levels of revenue in the world, the Patek ad where it says, you never really own a Patek, you merely hold on to it for the next generation. Like that was a game changer for them at that point. When Apple came out with Think Differently, they came out with Think Differently after, I think, he went into Pixar and came out of it with a lot of storytelling in his mind. Prior to that, if you looked at the ads, they were like data dumps of technical features.
1984. The 1984 ad was like iconic, right?
I forget which one that was.
That was the most famous commercial. That was it's like a Orwellian future. I mean, I almost think that was the beginning of the Think Differently campaign, but I could be wrong. And they throw the sledgehammer and it shatters it, and
So I guess like the point is that type of tight copywriting has made a difference in the world, and it has worked. Are we saying that it's not important anymore?
No
How do
way.
you guys feel about that? AJ, what do you think?
Marketing is the right message to the right person at the right time, and each of those is important. And maybe all that they're not saying, I don't think they were saying the right message is not important. I think given their business, they're saying there's lots of people working on the right message, but how many people are working on the right person at the right time? And that's something that we can help you with. And, you can say the most beautiful message about renewing my lease, but if my lease isn't up for another year, it's sort of wasted effort. Whereas if you knew when my lease was up, that's better. But of course, the holy grail, the nirvana is you knew my lease was up and you said something super, super interesting that sparked my, inspiration, creativity, belief, passion, whatever. What do you think, AJ?
Yeah. I mean, what you said, Austin, is correct. Storytelling, and it starts with storytelling. So what we're really talking about is storytelling, and then how does that waterfall down, and how do our teams take the story that we talk about as founders and the mission and the vision, and then turn that into the right copy, the right ad, the right time. And I think like the Think Differently is a great example where that was Jobs' messaging. But did he come up with Think Differently? I doubt it. I doubt he actually did.
Yeah, he didn't come up with it. But
they took his he was super involved. He was a micromanager in marketing. He did everything marketing. Everything that went out the door, ad copy, everything. But he didn't come up with it. Someone else did.
All right.
Well,
metaphysical conversation concluded. Time for shout outs and wins of the week. We go. Who's ready? Who wants to go
ready.
first?
I'll go first.
Yeah, AJ can go first.
While my internet's still working.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Go say something.
Simon Pan is a customer. Applet Tools. I'm in San Francisco. I did a flight bay tour with him. Cool. It was absolutely awesome. I sent pictures to Asid and Sam, and he listens to Topline. We had dinner last night, and we were driving, and he recalled something from an episode, and I had no idea, and it kind of threw me off. And so, yeah, he was like, "Oh, you didn't think I didn't listen to Topline?" And I was like, "I had no idea." So he's a RevOps leader, Apple Tools. He's an amazing customer. There's a reference for us. They've been customers for 3 years. And we.
What's his last name? Simon what?
Pan. Pan.
Simon Pan. Thank you, Simon Pan.
Shout out to
Sam's
Simon.
Awesome. Yeah, Simon's awesome.
Shout
Such a good guy.
Simon.
I'll go next. So 2 shout outs. I have 2. Can I do 2? I'll do 2.
You are allowed.
I'm allowed to.
Let me check the account. He's got credits.
I've got it.
He's got 2 credits available to be spent.
The first is I was hanging out with the enterprise go-to-market school at Pavilion. I just want to shout out everybody that's taking that course. There's some real serious, proper leaders that were part of the class, highly engaged. Just it makes me sometimes question why I'm not doing more courses to learn when I see the level of people that are in the audience taking the course. I'm like, oof. Like, I haven't taken one in a few months. Like, what's going on? It was such a powerful crew, and they asked questions that made me think, which I loved. And then I got a perfect score, and one of them wrote, "Wow." And I just got to let everyone know. Probably the best teacher in the world right here. I just had to put it out there. Just a humble brag. Wow.
By the way, Austin,
I have to say the wow came in all caps, which I think means a lot more than a wow with a big W and the rest is small. I just want to say.
Hold on. Austin, tell why you were teaching that class in the first place.
Because AJ was too busy doing something else. I had to step in.
It was a Topline recording. There was a recording of Topline at that time.
That's weird.
Okay.
All right. Second one.
The second one is Wiz. I want to Wiz is in talks to be acquired by Google for $23 billion. This company was started 4 years ago. It will be Google's largest acquisition and the largest acquisition of a company in under 5 years of founding. And I've just found it really annoying, to be honest, that a lot of people in our ecosystem are just disregarding this as there's nothing to learn from it. There's nothing to take away from it. It's an anomaly. That is ridiculous. This is something that should be celebrated. Like, imagine this is part of the promise of Silicon Valley, or like these type of stories. Imagine how many millionaires are going to come out of this organization. If somebody owned 0.1% of equity, that's $23 million. There are 140 employees that have been there for 3 to 4 years, almost fully vested. 1,400 employees. Lots of them are going to become founders, angel investors. There's going to be tons of liquidity that goes into the market. And I don't know if we've seen a company that has had such extreme product market fit for a very, very long time. So I think this is exceptional. I think it's amazing. I think it should be celebrated. And I think people that are just trying to like shrug their shoulders at it are just sour grapes, and it's not a good look. So shout out to Wiz and everyone involved.
Shout out to Wiz Wit. I'm gonna say a couple shout outs. First, Cameron Cousins, CRO of Arbinger Institute, was at GTM EMEA last week in London, gave a great talk, and is a big Topline listener.
Ooh.
And unsurprisingly, I am his favorite of the co-hosts, which just confirms his good taste in human beings. Cameron, thank you, sir. I also want to give a shout out to a couple of people. One of them is Jack Galinas. Jack is he's an account executive at Navan, and he walked up to me at an offsite dinner and said, "Hey, are you Sam Jacobs?" And then he said, "I love Pavilion. I signed up originally when I worked for Brian Kaplan at Andela, and it was just a great moment." And we, me and the leadership team, bought him and his entire SMB sales team at Navan a round of drinks for their support of Pavilion. So, Jack, thanks so much for coming over and say hi, and thanks for being a great member of Pavilion. And last, I'm reading a great book, one of the books that was on the New York Times, top 100 books of whatever the last X amount of years, probably in the 21st century. It's Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. It's about Henry VIII, Thomas Cromwell, Anne Boleyn, from the perspective of Thomas Cromwell. And we should all be grateful. We should all be grateful that we live in 2024. People died all the time back then. Yeah. You might wake up with a cold and be dead by sundown. And we are in a very blessed world where we don't live with that threat of imminent existential extinguishment. So great book. Always fascinating to read about the monarchy, but also just makes you feel really blessed to live in this time and age. So that's it. And with that, thanks everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll be back on Thursday for Topline Hotline.
This episode was brought to you by AirCall, the business communications intelligence platform. Deliver a better experience for your customers and your teams at AirCall. That's AIRCALL.io. Save time, save money, and improve performance with a single communications platform.
Thanks for listening to Topline. New episodes come out every Sunday. If you like what you heard today, subscribe so you never miss an episode, leave a 5-star review, and share it with your friends. Don't forget to join our Topline Slack channel to connect with us and discuss the topics we cover with other listeners. Click the link in the show notes. Lastly, if you're interested in joining Pavilion, you can learn more about membership at joinpavilion.com/membership. Thanks again for listening.